Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the program Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Prof, good evening, sir. Welcome to the program this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Good evening to you.
And to our viewers, just before we go into the questions for Prof this evening, don't forget, share the link with your friends, invite them as we go on with the program. It's going to be an interesting program this evening. There is so much happening on the international scene. Sir, Afghanistan has truly dominated the airwaves since the Taliban took over Kabul. And we've had different reactions from many world leaders, politicians, and everyone who's had an opinion has been sharing that. But I have a question for you before we start to proceed with the program this evening. At what point would or should world leaders start to consider the Taliban as the de facto government in Afghanistan and start relating with them as such?
Thank you for your question. Before I address that question specifically, let me just make some general comments that will put Afghanistan and the Taliban times for the world. These are the worst of times. And I'm afraid the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Now, I have taken liberties with one of the most prominent of British poets. I don't want to be guilty of the arrogance of the intellect by indulging in "I told you so." You see, I told you so. Americans have been wrong, not just Biden. From Bush the son, they've been guilty of what we scholars have always, in analysis, called the arrogance of power. Not the arrogance of the intellect, the arrogance of power. Not the arrogance of knowledge, but the arrogance of power. When 9/11 happened and Bush the son had to take retaliatory measures, he decided to go after Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, who had taken refuge in Afghanistan. He asked the Taliban government there at that time to hand them over. They were in the caves, in the mountains. American intelligence knew where they were. He asked the Taliban government in power at that time, 20 years ago, to hand them over. The Taliban refused. Now, I thought a clever general, and that's what a commander-in-chief is supposed to be, general of generals, will use his strength to override his weakness and counter the strength of his opponent. Meaning what? He should have sent the Air Force. America had the most powerful, the most developed Air Force capability. That's what I would have done. I would have leveled those mountains, even if I had to bomb those mountains for 30 days. Instead, he put American troops on the ground. He put American troops on the ground. That has always been, you see, Afghanistan has always been the graveyard of invaders, of other civilizations who had tried to come into Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been known to be their graveyard. It has consumed them. I believe I have told the story on this podcast. With your permission, I will repeat it. I will make it brief. About 30 years ago, just after the Taliban had driven out the Russians, the Soviet Union forces at that time, they couldn't defeat the Taliban. The Taliban defeated them with the help of the Americans, of course. They had defeated them and driven them out. About 30 years ago, an American journalist went into Afghanistan. And he went around, and finally he stumbled into this village, one of the rural areas, and found a grandfather, an old man, grisly old man. You know, one of these you could tell has seen life by the length of his beard and the color, you know. You could tell he was ancient of ages. And he congratulated the man for their winning the war. He said, but what I can't understand is, here are two of your grandchildren that you are teaching how to fire guns. You are training them how to fire guns. Why? You've won the war. The war is over. Oh, the old man said, in Afghanistan, the war is never over. If you have the time, I will take you to go and see the graveyard of the soldiers of Alexander the Great. They passed through here. I will take you to see the graveyard of Roman soldiers. They were here. I will take you to see the graveyard of British soldiers at the height of their empire building. They also were here. He said, after the Russians, some world power will make the same mistake and come in here. And lo and behold, the Americans went in. And now you are seeing history repeating itself. I wonder who is the next world power who's gonna litter the fields of Afghanistan with the grace of his soldiers. Now, this is history. American analysts should have been aware of this and advised their president, sir, don't put troops on the ground. Let us use the Air Force. They didn't. Why? Because President Bush, the Jr., wanted to be a Superman, the Rambo on the world stage at that time. Psychologically, this is understandable because he never fought in Vietnam. He never fought the Vietnam War. His father, who was president before him, helped him to escape fighting in the Vietnam War. And it has been my own experience as an analyst, as a scholar, that young heads of states or presidents or prime ministers, whatever title they may call themselves, they look for opportunities to have their own war as if to compensate for the fact that they never fought as a soldier. And that's why Tony Blair, Prime Minister of Great Britain, followed Bush into the Iraq War, just so he also could have a war of its own, even if they had to lie to the world and to themselves, because they knew the truth, to go into Iraq. So this is the background to what has happened today in Afghanistan. Let this be a lesson to all of us and to your generation who are going to become the next prime ministers and the next presidents and so on. Don't depend technologically on this computer. You flood it with information, and you think at the end you are going to get the most advanced, whatever it is. It's garbage in, garbage out. Listening to one professor or one analyst with a world view and an intelligent background is worth more than all the computers in the world. That's where Americans always make that mistake. You will see the huge machine that will be flying and, all light flashing. And then you will think they will never make a mistake. Where is the analyst who is going to take a look back and say, Mr. President, sorry, sir, you may fire me, but this is the history of Afghanistan. Now to your question, when are they going to recognize the Taliban? Recognize in the legal sense or recognize in the real sense? They've all recognized the Taliban. The Americans are saying openly, we are dealing with the Taliban. We have lines of communication to the Taliban commanders so that they will know what we are doing. They must not interfere with our aircraft. They must allow people access to the airport. We've got assurances from the Taliban. The Americans have in reality recognized the Taliban. Of course, legally, the wall. And when I listen to, I'm sorry, because this is all coming from the American side, really. When I listen to them saying, well, if the Talibans don't behave, I would say, if they don't behave, what will you do? Send back your troops in there. Okay, you've frozen their money in your banks, the money of their, and therefore they will be starved of funds. Yes, temporarily they will be starved of funds. Then they will increase the sale of drugs, of opiates, and what have you. And there are other world powers that be willing to do business with the Taliban. So the Americans shouldn't behave as if they are the only world power that can punish anybody else who decides to do business with the Taliban. It's just not going to happen. The reason why the Chinese are so interested in dealing the business with the Taliban is, number one, to make sure the Taliban don't encourage the Muslim communities in China. And number two, there are huge deposits of bauxite and other mineral resources that China is interested in. And this will be money-making business. You pay the government, whoever government is sitting there, to have access to invest in their mineral resources.
But, Prof, there's a point I want to pull out from what you've just said there. Yes, the US had intelligence, but it's not only the US. The US missed it. The British Prime Minister missed it. Russia missed it. How could world intelligence services get Afghanistan so wrong?
Well, I'm not sure who to blame, because the biggest game, political game in Washington, is to blame the intelligence community for political misjudgment. It's always good to blame them, because apart from leaking things, they can't talk back. So the White House will always then be blaming the intelligence community. But let me make one correction. The British didn't miss it, because at the last G7 meeting, where Biden told his colleagues what he was going to do in Afghanistan, the British High Command objected rather very strongly that it wasn't going to work, and that the way and manner he wanted to pull out was not going to work. Number two, the fact that the NATO, what title do they use for him now? The NATO, whether it's High Commissioner or whatever title they use for the top guy in NATO, not the military high command, but the European, whatever it is. He said in an interview, when America decided to leave, we couldn't, as EU, remain in Afghanistan. Yes, if we all increase our troop level, we probably could have done something. But with America not leaving secretly, but announcing that they are pulling out, Air Force, everything, it will have been untenable. That is what he said, which meant that they did consider it. They thought about it. So this thought came from Washington, not the rest of the world cannot share the blame, in the sense that there were alternatives that they could have done once Washington decided to pull out. And I understand, again, is it true? Everybody is busy leaking now that even American military high command were not happy, and that they told the White House so. But you don't go in and tell the president you can't do what you want to do. He will tell you he was elected, you are not elected, with all the stars, with all the stars on his shoulder. He will tell you. So you don't go into the White House and tell the president that. You kind of cleverly put up the options. You know who I miss at a time like this? I miss John F. Kennedy, the first American president that I met in my life. When there was this debacle at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, he went on national television and he said, I take responsibility for what has just happened. And I promise you, the American people, it will not happen again, because it was a military disaster. And I then sit there and watch President Biden saying no mistakes were made. The whole world knew that mistakes, not only were mistakes made, mistakes are still being made. And he said, no, I didn't make any mistake. No mistakes were made. I still will have done what. And I just wonder, well, God forgive me if I'm wrong, because I don't mean this in a derogatory way. But I just wonder whether the death of his son is still affecting him, the personal tragedy in his life. Because we saw Biden before now very empathetic in moments of tragedy. He knew how to reach across, and you could tell from his body language that how how he identified with the victims of tragedy. But this is a totally new Biden we are seeing in the past few days. I did nothing wrong. Nothing wrong. Everything is going on as it should go on. Why the whole world, including probably the whole of the Americans, are affronted by the tragedy in Afghanistan?
Sir, there is some people are saying that the speech from Biden was one. He took ownership of the problem. He said the buck stops with me. I am the president of the United States. The buck stops with me. And again, he relied on intelligence, which we all know now was flawed, but he relied on that intelligence to do what he did. And is there any way Biden could have pulled US troops out of Afghanistan that wouldn't have created chaos?
Yes, yes, there is a way. There is a way. Number one, as far as uh, your reference to he's saying the buck stops here. Usually, when a president says that, is a code language for saying I was wrong, or wrong decisions have been made, and I take responsibility for it. You cannot say the buck stops here and no mistakes were made. You can't. The two are oxymoronic. Number two, if you, I mean, you keep saying that, he relied on intelligence, and the intelligence he was fed was wrong in this case. What is the status? What is the role of the National Security Advisor? The National Security Advisor, in the days of Mark George Bundy under John F. Kennedy, in the days of Kissinger under Nixon, these were intellectuals. He didn't pull them out of the, bureaucratic intelligence setup. These were, scholars who had a world view and who had shown the capability of thinking outside the box. Therefore, who could say, Mr. President, something is wrong, something is faulty about this this intelligence. Why? Because look, we know, and after 20 years, you still don't know that the Taliban was embedded all on the countryside. You still don't know that the Taliban had embedded themselves among civilians in villages, or else you are blaming the Afghan government now for falling apart. Fine, that's an issue we can talk about later. But have you asked yourself, has Biden asked himself, has the National Security Advisor asked himself, why after 20 years have we not defeated the Taliban? America did not defeat the Taliban after 20 years. And you are now saying that the Afghan government did not stand up to them for 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks. You couldn't defeat them for 20 years. That's why you then finally decided you are leaving. And then you expect the Afghan government that does not have your kind of resources to hold up. So I think that if you go back, I'm sorry, this is not a podcast for promoting myself or for promoting our program, but please go back 4 months since we started discussing Afghanistan and look at the things that I had said about what will happen in Afghanistan. I'm sitting in Lagos, Nigeria, and I could foresee that this was going to happen. And the whole of American intelligence community, CIA, national security, whatever it is, the SEALs, the deep state, all of them could not see what I could see from this far off. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it. Something has gone disastrously wrong here. And I think that it is the decision of the president to pull out the 2,500 troops he inherited before he had pulled out all the Americans who were serving and working in Afghanistan. He and the Afghans who had worked with them as interpreters, as drivers, as cooks, as whatever have you, who have worked with them in auxiliary positions. He should have got them out first before he pulled out the 2,500 troops. Because you see, he pulled out the 2,500 troops, even though at the end of September, we have not even reached the beginning of September, because he has said they will be pulled out by the end of September. You had pulled all of them out by the middle of August. Now you pull them out, and you know the irony of it all, you've now put back 7,000 troops. That's the authorization level. You've now put those back, and now you are saying if by the end of August there are still Americans in Afghanistan, those troops will remain. They will remain until you've got out all American troops. Now, so you pulled out 2,500, you've now put back 7,000, but for a limited job of just securing the internal premises of the airport, while the Taliban secures the external premises of the airport. Does that make sense to you? How do you get, if you were an American there, how do you get from your house to the airport? You'll be passing through checkpoints manned by Taliban soldiers who are hunting down Afghans who work for Americans. So it's a death sentence.
But Prof, there are a few points here, and after this, we'll probably take one more on Afghanistan and then move off. The US had already signed a peace agreement with the Taliban. The Taliban had already agreed we're not going to attack the US as you leave Afghanistan. That was there. So, in a sense, they were not going to attack the Americans who were living on the outskirts and were trying to get out of the US if they kept to their words. So far, it looks like they are keeping to their word. But a question I want to put to you, sir, is this. A Taliban spokesperson has said that the West has a moral obligation to help to reconstruct Afghanistan. What kind of help should the West now be providing in Afghanistan given what has happened?
Well, if the Taliban really means that, then that is good news, because it gives the West some leverage. We will be prepared to provide funds for children education, both male and female. We will be prepared to provide funds for health facilities, provided you allow women to continue to work in the public service. We will be prepared to provide funds for infrastructural development, provided the way you impose Sharia law is in consonance not with Western civilization, I must emphasize that, but it's in consonance with other Muslim countries, like, if you like, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Morocco. So one is not talking about you. We are not asking you to become like England or like France or like the United States. But copy other Islamic countries who have, if you like, reformed the Sharia law to be in conformity with the 21st century. So that is, but if it is give us the money and let us do what we like, then that to me should not be acceptable.
Thank you for that, sir. Let's move to Africa. And there's a point around COVID 19 that I want to raise with you. And this is the issue coming out of South Africa and Johnson and Johnson, the big pharma company. It was reported this week that Johnson and Johnson was producing vaccines in South Africa, moving those vaccines to Europe while South Africa was waiting for the vaccine. How do you respond to that news, sir?
Vaccine imperialism, because this was brought to the attention of the South African government. And the South African government admitted that it was aware of this, that they had no choice, that there was a clause in the agreement between Johnson and Johnson and the South African government, where it was stated that South Africa gives up its power to veto where the vaccines will go. And the South African government spokesperson said you either sign that or no vaccine will be produced in South Africa. The power of a multinational used against the interests of a medium income country. And that's why I said this is vaccine imperialism. Simple. So where is all the talk about a global approach to COVID-19? I mean, again, we have said this 2 years ago, I believe, on this program, on that you are going to get vaccine nationalism. What I really didn't expect is vaccine imperialism. Pure and simple. Well, the lesson which we should learn from this is develop your own capability when you have the resources to do so. This will never have happened in Rwanda. It could only happen in a country like South Africa, in a country like Nigeria, with clueless leaders, corrupt leaders, who are more interested in lining their pockets than developing their countries, because the economy of South Africa, the economy of Nigeria, and its intellectual capability should have allowed each one of those countries to develop this, to foresee the need to be self-sufficient in these areas. And I'm not blaming the present government in these two countries. There is no, Thabo Mbeki was in power in South Africa. Obasanjo was in power in Nigeria. What's his name now? Zuma was in power in South Africa. Jonathan was in power in Nigeria. Cyril Ramaphosa, he is in power in South Africa. Buhari is in power in Nigeria. The resources of each of their countries, if those resources had been under the control of the president of Rwanda, Kagame, or even in Ghana, you'll have seen the wonders that they will have performed. So, we are to blame for being victims of this new form of imperialism. We are to blame.
Let's go to Zambia for some good news. An opposition leader has won the elections in Zambia. How do you react to that news, Prof?
Hip, 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 hooray for Africa. For once, some good news is coming out of Africa. It's unfortunate that it is coming at a time when the attention of the world through the press is focused on the tragedy in Afghanistan. But this is good news coming out of Africa. And it is even better news given the character of the opposition leader. Not a rabble-rouser, not a nobody coming out of the woods like the Taliban, but this a billionaire in his own right, um, because he's a successful businessman. Although I have said it, that there is no business millionaire or billionaire who is honest. You would, I mean, it's an oxymoron, you know, it's a contradiction in terms. You must have cheated a whole lot of people and the state for you to be a billionaire, whether it's in Africa or Europe or America or wherever it is. But now at least he doesn't have to steal the public funds when he gets there. That's number one. Number two, he knows about development. If he could grow his own investment to be this successful, he should be able to grow the he should be able to grow the resources of Zambia. And you know what? I just wonder, this has just occurred to me now. I just wonder whether this is not meant as a kick in the butt of the Chinese. Because Zambia was the first African country that was referred to as a captured state by the Chinese through their investments and how Zambia couldn't pay up its debts and that kind of thing. Have the Zambians have they not just reacted to the presence of the Chinese and their control of their economy? Let's watch and see. But at least it is good news. And I hope that the incumbent outgoing president will have the grace to accept the result and go into retirement to lick his wounds. And maybe, who knows, maybe next time, if his party picks him, he may have a chance. At least by that time, we will have seen what the incoming president can do for the development of Zambia.
Prof, there's a point I want to I want to pull out there. Trump was a billionaire before becoming president, and some may argue that that billionaire status did not particularly help the United States move forward.
Was Trump really a billionaire? From what we are hearing, not just now, but Mrs. Clinton said it during the campaign that Trump was a master of what do you call it? Was a master of bankruptcy. How many times did they file for bankruptcy? And that all this wealth he was talking about was simply paper wealth that some bright lawyers and clever financial analysts were helping him to prop up this false image. And since he left office and the Supreme Court had ruled that the district attorney in New York should have access to his tax returns, what is leaking out is that the man was not paying taxes. How can a billionaire not pay taxes? And where is the money? They can't find the money. So that he was a fake billionaire. To use his own language of fake news, he was a fake billionaire. So not a good example to use.
All right, sir. Let's look at China and Russia. I know you are a fan of space. But there's been a collision, one of the most major collisions in the last 10 years, where a Russian rocket has actually collided with a Chinese military satellite. What are your views on what has happened there, sir?
This has been one of the nightmares that had often kept me awake each time somebody sends a rocket up. And I have often wondered, hey guys, how do you manage to keep all these your satellites separate? Uh, you, I mean, it's not like when a plane is taking off, the control tower has a total picture in front of it of where several planes are. So it could send, messages to the pilot of American Airlines 001. Will you climb to this? Pilot of Chinese 002. Will you descend to this level? Pilot of Nigerian 010. Maintain your cruise level and that kind of thing. At least there is an organizer there. But in space, I didn't know. And I'm always saying to myself, I just hope these people are not going to crash into each other. And now it's just happened. I pray that it is deliberate. That should come to you as a shock that I will say, I pray that it is deliberate. Because if it is accidental, and I suspect that's really what it is, if it is accidental, then how many accidents are going to take place? How many accidents? As you have more and more of space nations, China, Russia, the United States, India, the EU, UAE, and I hope that some African country will join, at least for us to have the racial pride of having an African satellite or rocket up there. To me, this calls for an international conference of space nations and non-space nations. Now, you might ask, what's the point of having non-space nations there? They will watch and defend the interests of the victims of rockets and satellites that have accidents and come descending upon the rest of us. Or else, if you leave it to just the space nations, they will never take our interest into consideration when they are drawing up whatever convention that they are going to draw up to guard and control this space market that is up there. So that's why I said I will sleep easier if it was deliberate, because then one knows it won't happen too often. But if it's accidental, then I can't even go to my village, because who knows where and I know that's your village as well. Who knows where the scraps of the satellite will come flying down. But it is no, we shouldn't sleep easy because this has happened. It will happen again. There are just too many rockets, too many satellites up there. Some already, their lifespan had expired. And so who knows the trajectory of their descent into the atmosphere and hopefully into the ocean.
So let's deal with one issue, which is again something that hasn't happened. It's a first. And this is what they call the Havana Syndrome, the sickness referred to as the Havana Syndrome, which for the first time, the condition has been detected in a NATO country. Some US diplomats in Germany have fallen ill with this sickness. Does that worry you, sir?
It does. Let's tell our viewers what the Havana Syndrome is. This first happened in Cuba, in the embassy of the United States in Cuba, where sound was absorbed by the brains of some of the American diplomats. And it was like the sound was frying the brains and causing considerable, you don't recover from it, causing considerable damage to the brain because it happened first in the American embassy in Cuba. They call it the Havana Syndrome. And the United States, without evidence, here we go again about, lack of policies without evidence, blamed Cuba and imposed sanctions on Cuba. Since then, it has happened, I believe, even in one of the American consulates in China. And now, as you rightly said in your intro, for the first time, it has happened in an American embassy in a NATO country. What does that suggest to you? Shouldn't the Americans be looking inside their embassies, the kind of machinery they are set up? Maybe this thing is not coming from the outside. Maybe it is something that is malfunctioning in the intelligence machinery inside the embassy itself. That's where I will look. I mean, if one wants to be, objective about the search, it's like searching for the source of COVID-19. You've blamed China because Wuhan, a lab in Wuhan is supposed to be the beginner of it. But up till now, because that search was being motivated by politics, you still are not going into this thing with an open mind. And I think this is what the United States, even though it's been a victim here, had not done, which is to go into this with an open mind. I will ask two questions. One, why is it that no embassy, no other embassy of any country has been infected by this? Why is it just American embassy? Two, why is it then so widespread geographically that maybe it is something we ourselves have accidentally built inside our embassies? It could be for protection. It could be for anything else that is malfunctioning and causing this damage.
Finally, before we go this evening, there is another question I want to put to you, and you've actually touched on it in a sort of way when you referred to the press coverage that we're having at this point in time, focused on Afghanistan. Yet we have Haiti that has suffered a 7.2 magnitude earthquake. It reported that almost 2,000 people have died, and many more would be found dead. Yet we don't seem to be having enough coverage, enough nations thinking about the aid that should go to Haiti. Everybody is talking about Afghanistan. What do you have to say about this, sir?
Um, it's what we scholars of international and strategic studies uh, have been aware of since Hans Magunther wrote his book, his classic on world politics. Power is the determining factor for attention, determining factor for uh, interests, determining factor for everything in world politics. Power. If you are a world power, whatever happens to you happens to the rest of the world. And that's why you got that, when Washington sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. Now, when China sneezes, the rest of us will develop a headache. When Russia sneezes, well, I suppose we will develop stomachache. But when poor Haiti sneezes, it's like a mosquito buzzing past your ear. You kind of, you don't even slap yourself. You are careful. You just kind of wave it past and you turn your attention to something else. But if the American president coughs, oh, there will be analysis by all world experts on coughing as to what does this mean for the whole world that the American president coughed. Simply where you occupy on the power stratum. This has happened to the United States. It has happened to the European Union, a combination that's dreadful. That's almost what? I mean, in terms of power configuration, you are still talking about, the top dog in the world. And that is why it has pushed the news about Haiti, pushed the news about Zambia, even pushed the news about South Africa and the J&J. If J&J were happening in the United States, Johnson and Johnson, and there was some agreement that you will ship vaccines from Alabama to New York, whereas Alabama, it will be all over the news will be all over the world. That all these other countries are not occupying, sufficient power in the stratum to demand attention. That's the explanation.
Prof, thank you for your views and your insight this evening. To our viewers, thank you for joining. Thank you for the comments you've put online. We will be back again next week, same time. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, just click the subscribe button on YouTube or like the Facebook page. And anytime we go live, you will get the notification that we have gone live. Once again, thank you for joining us this evening. Prof, thank you for your time once again this evening. We'll see you next week.
Peace.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.